Good Saturday morning. Matt Ray sitting in. KGO Radio 810. We're taking your calls at 80-80-810. 415-808-0810 is the number up until the 1 o'clock hour. The search for Flight 370 continues, the missing Malaysian airline flights. Now, earlier we had developments, a China satellite possibly spotting some debris. That turned out to be not true. Then they started searching. Australian officials took the lead. They started searching for some satellite images. They couldn't find those because of inclement weather, that kind of thing. Now the very latest Chinese satellites have spotted an object that's 74 feet long, 43 feet wide. It's a floating object. Bottom line is we don't know. We've been reporting this. We've been listening to this on the news. We don't know. But imagine being a family member of somebody on board that flight. And that brings us to our guest this hour. He's Ken Jenkins. We talked to him a couple of weeks ago before he left for Kuala Lumpur. He's an aviation crisis consultant. He's just returned yesterday. How are you today, Ken?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm doing fine. Thank you very much for asking.
Yeah, thanks for joining us here on KGO. We saw earlier this week, Malaysia's been updating the media daily on this thing, and earlier this week you had a couple of women taken out of the media briefing because they were screaming and yelling and crying. They have no idea where their family members are. They have no idea. What are these people going through, Ken?
It's just a nightmare for the family members right now. And imagine if you had lost your loved one in a plane crash, the grief that you'd be feeling. But now take that and compound it with the fact that you don't know if there's been a plane crash. You don't know if the plane was hijacked. You can't find the wreckage. And every day there's something else that's dangled in front of them that brings some type of hope, like you were just mentioning about the piece of debris. And then when it's found that it's not there, their hopes are dashed again. And so they've been spiraling or cycling up and down on this emotional ride, which is just taking its toll on all the family members.
Taking its toll. What do you mean by that? Because, I've lost family members. The grieving process starts immediately. I can't imagine these people are even beginning the grieving process when there are so many unknown factors. Mm-hmm. What does this do to them emotionally and mentally?
Well, and that's the point. I mean, you make a great point, Matt. Is they can't really start the grieving process because they don't feel as if they have something to grieve. It's still unknown. While I was in Kuala Lumpur watching the local coverage, there were several of the family members that have resigned themselves to the fact that they do believe the plane has crashed and that they're not going to see their loved ones again. And yet there's another faction of folks that still believe that the plane could have landed somewhere and they just haven't found it yet. The officials haven't found it yet, and they're holding out hope that their loved ones are alive. And because you have both of those, and there's no confirmation of wreckage or debris or the aircraft anywhere, people really haven't been able to move forward in any type of process, much less grieving, because of the unknown.
Comparing your involvement in situations like these, you're a crisis aviation expert. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many of these you've had to deal with, but have you ever seen anything like this before?
Yeah, and thankfully I have not ever seen anything like this. I have worked a number of accidents in the past, and even as horrific as September 11th was and other accidents,
wow.
People can see what happened and they can come to terms with what happened. And in this case, there's nothing to look at. So they don't have that ability to come to terms with a situation that they don't really know what's happened to them yet. So it's certainly been the most challenging response that I've ever had to work with, simply because of the unknown.
What was your role in Kuala Lumpur, and talk about some of the experience you had directly interacting with some of these family members?
In Kuala Lumpur, I was working with several folks, and we were helping with Malaysia Airlines with the response with regards to family assistance and setting up of the Family Assistance Center. Most of the families, if not all the families, were appreciative of having a central location to go to be able to receive information. The frustration came when the information didn't really change from day to day. And while there were updates every day, the updates simply were we were out searching and didn't find anything. And so you can imagine their frustration as day 7 came and went with no information. Day 10 came and went without any new leads. And then all the conspiracy theories out there. And so their frustration is high, their anxiety is high, and rightly so based on what they're having to experience.
A lot of lawmakers here, specifically those on intelligence committees in Washington, they're blaming placing blame on Malaysia. They're placing blame on other governments, saying, look, they should have consulted us immediately. We would have been able to help more. Is that the right thing to do in a situation like this?
I think there's a time and a place for that to come out. I don't think it's the time right now. I think the time now is to really focus on the investigation as you're starting to see that come together more and more with all the additional nationalities and our countries that are out helping with the search. I think after the wreckage has been found and provided that it is found, there can be a debrief of sorts that says, in hindsight, what could we have done differently? But I don't think the blame game, I think it hurts the situation versus helping it.
We've talked about the victims, Ken. What's going through your head as an aviation crisis consultant? What's going through your head when you get a piece of information, but you've been fed, two or three others prior to that? What's going through your head in having to disseminate this information? And you're probably thinking, oh gosh, is this even going to help? I mean, what were you thinking in all this?
And thank you for asking that question, because that's a challenge for the responders, not just me in particular. The information is critical to families, whether it's a family of a passenger or family of a crew. They want to know what you know, and the delicate balance is being able to provide that information in a way that says, this is what we have right now. We're still vetting the information out. We can't confirm that it's valid or not. And herein again lies the problem is you want to share, but at the same time, you don't want to share something that you don't know to be true. Yet if it comes out in the media, then the families are going to ask you about it at the press conference anyway. So it's a very delicate dance that you have to perform to keep the families informed without getting their hopes up unnecessarily.
Ken, can I get you to hold on through the break? I want to talk a little bit about the Malaysian government, if I could, and how they're responding to this, and maybe get your take on that. We are coming up against a break, though. Can I get you to hold on through one break?
Sure.
Okay. Taking your calls at 80-88-10, 415-808-0810 is the number. We're talking to Ken Jenkins. He's an aviation crisis consultant. He's just returned from Kuala Lumpur. The search for the missing airliner continues. Good Saturday morning. Matt Ray sitting in, KGO Radio 810. We're taking your calls at 80-88-10. 415-808-0810 is the number. Ken Jenkins is our guest this hour. He's an aviation crisis consultant who's just returned from Kuala Lumpur. Those family members of victims on the Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, they have no idea what's going on. And Ken, before the break, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Malaysia and the government specifically and how they're handling this situation and compare it to other governments that have maybe handled similar situations or similar crises. And what's the difference here?
The main difference appears to be, and again, in my opinion, from just watching how they're presenting themselves in the media, is a serious lack of organization and command and control. They are providing information. It just comes across as if they're not prepared for this type of situation and who's actually in charge within the government as to who should be presenting the information.
Was there any talk of reform in all of this, or right now, they're focused on just finding this thing?
The talk is focused on this type of thing, but there has been discussion about how accident investigations have been led in other countries. It's primarily, of course, in the United States, where you would have the National Transportation Safety Board that would take the lead in the accident and provide all information through a board representative, and we haven't really seen that as the case in Malaysia.
Is there any one maybe family member you spoke to or one situation that particularly sticks out in your mind?
The situation that sticks out in my mind the most are the Chinese families, and simply based on the level of emotion that they're feeling. They seem to be the most demonstrative in terms of letting their emotions be known and seen by people. It doesn't mean that other people's emotions aren't running high. They certainly can be shown in different ways, and it reflects either culturally or even just through the individual. But I would say through the Chinese groups, being the largest group, those are the folks that are weighing heaviest on my mind.
Well, does that change maybe your tactic or your approach when you're dealing with a different culture like that?
No, not really, because what you appreciate is that their anger and frustration, whether it's the Chinese or any of the other passenger families on board, is their frustration with, again, and it comes down to, and I hate to say it over and over again,
That's okay.
is the lack of new information.
Yeah.
And they feel that the government of Malaysia is not being fully transparent, and it's very difficult to have that come across when they haven't seen that in the past. So I can appreciate where they're coming from.
So you were gone for a couple of weeks. What comes next for you, and what comes next for the family members of victims?
Well, for the families and of those involved, it is just that the wait and see game of will there be debris found or not. At some point, one would have to wonder if the government of Malaysia would, and I think I heard this on the news today, that there may come a time where the search is called off. And at which point do they declare that there is a loss of aircraft versus just not knowing what happened to the plane? For me, if the wreckage is found, then I would go back to Kuala Lumpur and assist with the finding the debris and then the collection of personal effects and processing personal effects if there are any to collect, and then have those returned to the family members.
Does this situation in any way change the way maybe you'll do business in the future? I mean, it's obviously going to change the way I would think Malaysia does business. Is it going to change the way you do business? I mean, you went over there and came back, I wouldn't say empty-handed, but, you came back and the situation really hasn't changed.
No, well, and empty-handed in the fact as not being able to find the aircraft certainly is one way to look at it. But I would say from lessons learned, I have many lessons learned that I would share with clients and whatnot, and that is to stay in front of the situation, be fully transparent, and be organized and concise in your approach in working with families, and share what you know when you know it.
Ken Jenkins, Aviation Crisis Consultant. The website is kenjenkinsllc.com. Ken, we appreciate your time. We'll check back in with you again.
All right. Thank you very much, Matt.
All right. You take care.